They say parents know their children best. They say family will always believe in your dreams. I spent 10 years believing that was true, until the day I knelt over my mother's unconscious body on our kitchen floor, fighting to restart her heart, while my father screamed for someone to help us. The ambulance driver who arrived looked at my parents and said those 5 words that changed everything. "This is the paramedic who saved your life." But let me tell you how a girl they called too stupid for college became the woman who refused to let death win that day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Martinez, and this is the story of how I proved everyone wrong, including myself. I'm 28 years old now, but this journey started a decade ago in a cramped living room in Riverside, California, where 3 adults sat me down to explain why my dreams were bigger than my brain. The coffee table was covered with college brochures: UC Davis, UCLA, UC San Diego. All those glossy pages filled with smiling pre-med students in white coats, holding stethoscopes like promises. I had spent months collecting them, studying admission, requirements, calculating costs. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, had handed me that stack with genuine excitement. "Jessica, your science grades are exceptional. You should really consider medical school." That spring evening, I was 18 and invincible. High school graduation was 2 weeks away, and I had been accepted to Riverside Community College, with plans to transfer to a 4-year university for pre-med. My parents had been quiet about the whole thing for months, exchanging glances I pretended not to notice. But that night, they decided it was time for what my father called a reality check. "Mija," my mother said, settling into her worn recliner with a sigh. Patricia Martinez had worked in the school cafeteria for 15 years, serving lunch to hundreds of kids daily. Her hands were rough from constant washing, her back permanently curved from leaning over steam tables. "We need to talk about this college thing." My father, Robert, sat across from me on the couch, still wearing his construction clothes. Dust from the job site clung to his jeans, and his work boots left small piles of dirt on our beige carpet. He had built houses for 23 years, rising before dawn and coming home after sunset, his skin weathered by California sun and his shoulders bent from carrying loads that would break most people. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he began, picking up one of the brochures. "This medical school idea, it's not realistic, Jessica." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What do you mean, not realistic?" My mother leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetie, medical school is for rich kids. Kids whose parents are doctors or lawyers. Kids who don't have to work 3 jobs to pay for textbooks." "I can work," I said quickly. "I've been working at Denny's since junior year. I can handle school and work." My father shook his head. "It's not just about work, Mija. It's about being smart enough. Really, smart. The kind of smart that comes naturally." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I am smart, Dad. I have a 3.8 GPA. I scored in the 91st percentile on the SAT. Test scores aren't everything," my mother said. "Look at your brother, Mike. He's doing great with the auto repair shop. Real skills, real money, no debt. That's practical." Mike was 20, 2 years older than me, and everything my parents thought a child should be. He had dropped out of community college after one semester to work full-time at Martinez Auto Repair with our uncle. Within a year, he was managing the shop, fixing cars with an intuition that impressed everyone. My parents talked about him like he had discovered electricity. "Mike has a gift," my father continued. "Natural talent for fixing things. But medical? School? That's memorizing thousands of facts, understanding complex chemistry, making life or death decisions. That takes a special kind of intelligence." "The kind I don't have?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. My parents exchanged that look again. The one that said they had discussed this privately, reached a conclusion, and now had to deliver the verdict. "Jessica, you're smart enough for a good job," my mother said carefully. "Maybe nursing, like Ashley. She makes decent money at the clinic, has good benefits. That's a solid career for a woman." Ashley was my brother's girlfriend, a licensed practical nurse at a family practice downtown. She had gone to a 2-year program, graduated with minimal debt, and immediately found steady work. My parents adored her, constantly holding her up as an example of practical success. "Or teaching," my father added. "Teachers get summers off, good benefits, steady paycheck." Nothing wrong with teaching. I stared at the brochures scattered across the table. All those smiling faces, all those dreams that suddenly felt as far away as the moon. But I want to be a doctor. I want to help people in emergency situations, save lives. "Wanting something doesn't make you capable of achieving it," my father said not unkindly. "Look, mija, we love you. But we also love you enough to tell you the truth. Medical school is 8 years of school, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and the hardest academic challenge in the world. Most people who try it fail, and most people who try it are a lot smarter than us." Smarter than us. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. My parents had always been proud of their work ethic, their ability to provide for the family through physical labor and determination. But they had also always been clear about their limitations. Neither had finished college. Neither felt comfortable with abstract concepts or academic terminology. They lived in a world of concrete problems with tangible solutions. "We're working-class people," my mother said. "There's no shame in that. But medical school is for a different kind of people." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. People who grew up with books and science museums and parents who can help with homework. We did our best, but we can't give you what those families give their kids. I thought about my childhood. Homework done alone at the kitchen table while my parents worked evening shifts. Science projects completed with supplies from the dollar store. Parent-teacher conferences where my mother nodded politely while teachers used words she didn't understand. They had done their best, but their best hadn't included fostering academic ambition. "What if I prove you wrong?" I asked. "What if I do well in my pre-med classes?" My father rubbed his temples. "Jessica, community college isn't medical school. The classes you'll take at RCC are basic compared to what comes later. Even if you do well there, the real test comes when you transfer to a university. That's when you'll be competing with kids who went to private schools, who had tutors, who have been preparing for this their entire lives. Those kids have advantages we can't give you," my mother added. "It's not fair, but it's reality." I gathered the brochures slowly, my hands shaking slightly. "So what are you saying? That I shouldn't even try?" "We're saying you should be smart about your choices," my father replied. "Community college is expensive enough. A 4-year university costs a fortune. Medical school would bury you in debt for decades. And for what? To probably fail and end up with nothing? There are other ways to help people," my mother said. "Nursing is helping people. Teaching is helping people. You don't have to be a doctor to make a difference." But I wanted to be a doctor. I had wanted it since I was 12 and watched paramedics save my neighbor's life after a heart attack. I had spent 6 years imagining myself in an emergency room, making quick decisions, using my hands and mind to pull people back from the edge of death. The dream wasn't about prestige or money. It was about being the person who showed up when everything went wrong and made it right. "What about Ashley?" I asked. "She went to nursing school. Didn't you support her education?" "Ashley was realistic," my mother said. 2 years, practical training, immediate job prospects. She didn't aim so high that she was guaranteed to fail. The conversation continued for another hour, but the conclusion was already clear. My parents loved me, but they didn't believe in me, not the way I needed them to. They saw my dreams as dangerous delusions that would lead to financial ruin and personal disappointment. In their minds, they were protecting me from inevitable heartbreak. That night, I lay in my small bedroom, staring at the ceiling and feeling something crack inside my chest. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something deeper and colder. The realization that the two people who had raised me, who claimed to know me better than anyone, fundamentally didn't understand who I was or what I was capable of. The next morning, I drove to Riverside Community College and registered for my pre-med prerequisite classes anyway. Biology, chemistry, anatomy, physiology. I signed up for 18 units, knowing I would have to work 30 hours a week at Denny's to pay for tuition and books. When I came home with the registration paperwork, my parents were sitting at the kitchen table with Mike and Ashley. They all looked up when I walked in, and I could tell they had been discussing me. I registered for fall classes, I announced, setting the papers on the table. My father glanced at the course list and shook his head. Organic chemistry? Microbiology? Jessica, these classes are going to eat you alive. Maybe, I said, but I'm going to find out. Mike leaned back in his chair, grinning. Little sister thinks she's going to be a doctor. That's cute. It's not cute, Ashley said, though not unkindly. It's unrealistic. Do you know how hard nursing school was? And that's nothing compared to medical school. I know it's hard, I replied. That's why I want to do it. My mother stood up and put her hand on my shoulder. Mia, we're not trying to crush your dreams. We're trying to save you from disappointment. What if I don't get disappointed? I asked. What if I succeed? Then we'll be the first to celebrate, my father said. But we're not going to pretend it's likely. That conversation set the tone for the next 4 years. Every semester when I brought home my schedule, my parents would shake their heads and predict failure. Every time I struggled with a concept, or did poorly on an exam, they would remind me that they had warned me. And every time I succeeded, they would act surprised, as if my good grades were statistical anomalies rather than evidence of ability. The worst part wasn't their doubt. The worst part was how their doubt began to infect my own confidence. When I struggled with organic chemistry that first semester, I heard my father's voice in my head. These classes are going to eat you alive. When I scored poorly on my first anatomy exam, I remembered my mother's words. Medical school is for a different kind of people. But I kept going, partly out of stubbornness, partly out of genuine passion for the subject matter, and partly because I had met Emma Rodriguez in my first biology class, and she believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Emma was planning to become a teacher, just like my parents had suggested for me, but she supported my medical ambitions without question. When I doubted myself, she reminded me of my strengths. When I wanted to quit, she talked me through the crisis. When my family made comments about my doctor phase, Emma would roll her eyes and change the subject. Your parents love you, she said one afternoon as we studied together in the library. But love doesn't automatically equal understanding. They can't see what you're capable of because they've never seen anyone like you do what you're trying to do. Maybe they're right, I said, staring at my chemistry textbook. Maybe I'm in over my head. Are you failing? Emma asked. No, but I'm not excelling either. I'm getting B's and B minuses. Medical schools want A's. You're working 30 hours a week and taking 18 units. The fact that you're passing at all is remarkable. Give yourself some credit. But credit was hard to come by at home. Every family dinner became an opportunity for subtle reminders about my impractical choices. Mike would talk about his latest automotive triumph, while Ashley discussed her stable job and good benefits. My parents would nod approvingly, and then turn to me with worried expressions. How are your grades, Miha? My mother would ask. Good, I would answer. Good enough for medical school? My father would follow up. I don't know yet. I'm still learning. Maybe it's time to consider backup plans, Ashley would suggest. Have you thought about respiratory therapy? Or radiology tech? Those are good medical careers that don't require as much schooling. The suggestions were always practical, always safe, always less than what I wanted. And gradually, I began to internalize the message that wanting more than what seemed reasonable was selfish and foolish. By my second year at community college, I was exhausted. Not just from the workload, but from constantly defending my choices to people who claimed to love me. I started to consider their alternatives. Maybe respiratory therapy would be enough. Maybe I could find fulfillment helping people without putting myself through the torture of medical school. But then something happened that reminded me why I had started this journey in the first place. I was working an evening shift at Denny's when a customer collapsed in booth 7. Heart attack. The man was in his 50s, alone, clutching his chest and gasping for air. Other customers screamed and backed away. My manager called 911 and then stood there helplessly. But I didn't stand there. I moved without thinking, drawing on everything I had learned in my anatomy and physiology classes. I checked his pulse, assessed his breathing, positioned him to keep his airway clear. I talked to him calmly, keeping him conscious until the paramedics arrived. Later, the lead paramedic pulled me aside. "You did good work," she said. "Kept him stable until we got here. That probably saved his life." Her name was Lisa Thompson, a captain with the Riverside Fire Department. She was in her 40s, confident and competent, exactly the kind of person I wanted to become. "Are you in school for nursing?" she asked. "Pre-med," I said. "Good for you. Ever think about emergency medicine? Paramedic work?" I hadn't, actually. I had been so focused on the idea of becoming a doctor that I hadn't considered other ways to work in emergency medicine. "It's good preparation for medical school," Lisa continued. "Real-world experience with trauma and emergency situations. Plus, you can work as a paramedic while you're in school. Pays better than restaurant work." She handed me her card. "Think about it. We need more people like you in emergency services." That night, I went home and researched paramedic training programs. The certification required 2 years of intensive study, but it would qualify me to work on ambulances, in emergency rooms, anywhere people needed immediate medical care. It was demanding, technical, and required exactly the kind of quick thinking and medical knowledge I loved. More importantly, it was a way to prove to myself and everyone else that I belonged in medicine. When I told my parents about the paramedic program, their reaction was predictably mixed. "It's dangerous work," my mother said. "At least it's more realistic than medical school," my father added. But Mike surprised me. "Actually, that sounds pretty cool, like being a firefighter, but for medical stuff." Even Ashley nodded approvingly. "Paramedics make good money, and you can always go back to school later if you want." The phrase "if you want" hung in the air, as if my desire to become a doctor was a phase I would eventually outgrow. But I had learned something important that night at Denny's. I had learned that I was capable of staying calm in a crisis, of using my knowledge under pressure, of making a real difference when it mattered most. For the first time in 2 years, I felt certain about my path. I finished my prerequisites at community college with a 3.6 GPA and transferred to UC Riverside to complete my bachelor's degree in biology. The transition was harder than I had expected. The classes were more challenging, the competition more intense, and the financial pressure more overwhelming than ever. My parents' predictions began to seem prophetic. I struggled with advanced chemistry. I barely passed physics. My GPA dropped to 3. 2, then 3. 0. Medical schools wanted students with 3, 8, or higher. At this rate, I wouldn't even qualify to apply. The breaking point came during my 3rd semester at UCR. I was taking biochemistry, immunology, and advanced anatomy simultaneously while working 25 hours a week at a medical office downtown. The workload was crushing, and I was falling behind in every class. One evening, I called home in tears. "I can't do this anymore," I told my mother. "It's too hard. I'm going to fail." "Oh, mija," she said softly. "Come home. We'll figure something else out." That weekend, I sat at the same kitchen table where my parents had first told me I wasn't smart enough for medical school. This time, they didn't say, "I told you so." They were kind and supportive, offering practical alternatives. "The paramedic program is still an option," my father said. "That's good, steady work." "Or you could finish your degree and teach high school science," my mother suggested. "Teachers are needed everywhere." Ashley, who was there for Sunday dinner, nodded sympathetically. "Sometimes our dreams change as we get older. That's not failure, that's growth." For a moment, I was tempted to agree. To accept that my parents had been right all along, that I had aimed too high and needed to settle for something more reasonable. But then I thought about Lisa Thompson, the paramedic captain who had seen something in me that night at Denny's. I thought about the man whose life I had helped save, and how it felt to use my knowledge to make a difference. I thought about all the hours I had spent studying, all the concepts I had mastered, all the small victories that my family had overlooked. I wasn't failing because I lacked intelligence. I was struggling because I was trying to do too much at once. "I'm going to finish my degree," I said finally, "but I'm going to do it differently." The next week, I dropped 2 of my 3 classes and reduced my work hours. Instead of trying to graduate in 4 years, I accepted that it would take me 5. Instead of maintaining a full course load, I focused on doing well in fewer classes. The change was immediate. My grades improved, my stress decreased. I rediscovered my love for the subject matter. More importantly, I enrolled in an EMT certification program on weekends. If I was going to prove I belonged in medicine, I wanted to start working in the field as soon as possible. The EMT program was unlike anything I had experienced in traditional college classes. It was hands-on, practical, and immediately applicable. We learned to take vital signs, administer oxygen, perform CPR, and handle basic medical emergencies. Every skill had a direct connection to saving lives. I excelled immediately. The instructors noticed my natural aptitude for emergency medicine. My classmates asked me to study with them. For the first time in years, I felt truly confident in an academic setting. When I passed the EMT certification exam with a score of 94%, I called my parents to share the news. "That's wonderful, mija," my mother said, and I could hear genuine pride in her voice. "So what's next?" my father asked. "I'm going to work as an EMT while I finish my degree," I said, "and then I'm going to paramedic school." There was a pause. "What about medical school?" my mother asked. "I'm keeping that option open," I said. "But right now, I want to focus on emergency medicine." It wasn't a lie exactly. I did want to focus on emergency medicine, but I also knew that my dream of becoming a doctor had evolved. Maybe I would become an emergency room physician. Maybe I would become a paramedic supervisor. Maybe I would find a path I hadn't even considered yet. What mattered was that I was moving forward, building skills, and proving to myself that I belonged in medicine. The day I started working as an EMT for Riverside Emergency Services was one of the proudest days of my life. I put on the uniform, loaded equipment into the ambulance, and knew that I was finally doing what I was meant to do. My partner was an experienced paramedic named David Chen. He was 26, calm under pressure, and immediately supportive of my ambitions. "So you want to go to paramedic school?" he asked during our first shift together. "Eventually," I said. "I want to get some experience first." "Good plan. The more real-world experience you have, the better you'll do in the program. Plus, it helps to know whether you actually like the work before you commit to 2 years of intensive training." That first shift, We responded to 6 calls: a minor car accident, a diabetic emergency, an elderly woman with chest pain, a construction worker with a broken arm, a child with a severe allergic reaction, and a teenager who had overdosed on prescription medication. In each situation, I watched David work with a combination of technical skill and human compassion that impressed me deeply. He was fast, but never rushed, thorough, but never hesitant. He treated every patient with dignity, regardless of their situation. By the end of the shift, I knew I had found my calling. Over the next year, I worked as an EMT while finishing my bachelor's degree. The combination was challenging but manageable, and I loved the variety. During the day, I studied biology and chemistry. At night, I responded to emergencies throughout Riverside County. The work was exactly what I had hoped it would be: challenging, meaningful, and constantly educational. Every call taught me something new about medicine, about people, and about myself. More importantly, I was good at it. Really good. My supervisors noticed. My partners requested to work with me. I received commendations for my performance on several difficult calls. For the first time in my life, I was working in a field where my intelligence was recognized and valued. My colleagues respected my knowledge, sought my input, and trusted my judgment. It was a revelation after years of being told I wasn't smart enough for medical challenges. When I graduated from UC Riverside, with a bachelor's degree in biology and a 3.4 GPA, my parents attended the ceremony. They were proud, certainly, but also seemed surprised that I had actually finished. "So, what's next?" my father asked as we drove home from the graduation. "Paramedic school," I said. "I start the program at RCC in the fall." "And after that?" my mother asked. "I'll work as a paramedic. Maybe become a supervisor eventually. Maybe go back to school for nursing or something else." I didn't mention medical school. That dream had become too personal, too precious to share with people who had never believed in it. I would pursue it quietly, on my own terms, without seeking their approval or fearing their doubt. The paramedic program at Riverside Community College was the most challenging academic experience of my life. 2 years of intensive coursework, covering advanced anatomy, pharmacology, cardiology, trauma medicine, and emergency procedures. We learned to intubate patients, start IVs, administer medications, interpret EKGs, and perform advanced life support in chaotic environments. The program had a 50% dropout rate. Students who had excelled in traditional college classes struggled with the hands-on pressure and rapid decision-making required. But I thrived. Everything I had learned during my years of academic struggle served me well. I knew how to study efficiently. I knew how to manage stress. I knew how to persist when concepts were difficult. More importantly, I had confidence. 2 years of working as an EMT had taught me that I belonged in emergency medicine. I wasn't the smartest person in the program, but I was competent, dedicated, and unafraid of difficult situations. My instructors were impressed with my clinical performance. During my hospital rotations, doctors and nurses commented on my professionalism and skill. I was becoming the medical professional I had always wanted to be. The only shadow on my success was my family's continued skepticism about my choices. They were proud of my progress, but they also seemed to view my achievements as lucky accidents, rather than earned accomplishments. "Jessica's doing really well in her paramedic program," my mother would tell relatives. "She's always been good in school, but this is different, more practical." The implication was that I had finally found something suited to my actual abilities, rather than something that exceeded them. Even Ashley, who should have understood the difficulty of medical training, seemed surprised by my success. "I never thought you'd stick with it this long," she admitted one evening. "I figured you'd realize how hard it was and switch to something easier." "Why would I switch to something easier?" I asked. "Because most people do," she said. Most people figure out their limitations and adjust their expectations accordingly. But I didn't want to adjust my expectations. I wanted to exceed them. During my final semester of paramedic school, Lisa Thompson offered me a position with the Riverside Fire Department. It was a prestigious job with excellent benefits and opportunities for advancement. "You're one of the best students we've seen come through the program," she told me. "We'd like you to join our team." I accepted immediately. Working for the fire department would give me experience with the most challenging emergency calls in the county. It would also provide a stable income while I considered my next steps. On the day I graduated from paramedic school, my entire family attended the ceremony. They watched as I received my certification and was sworn in as a paramedic with Riverside Fire Department Station 19. For the first time, I saw genuine amazement in my parents' eyes. Not just pride, but recognition that I had accomplished something truly difficult. "We're so proud of you, Mija," my father said after the ceremony. "You've worked so hard for this," my mother added. But even in their pride, I detected a note of finality. As if paramedic certification was the culmination of my ambitions rather than another step toward a larger goal. That was fine. I had learned to keep my dreams private, to pursue my goals without seeking their validation. I was 26 years old, financially independent, and working in a field I loved. Whether or not my family understood my future plans was irrelevant. What mattered was that I had proven something important to myself. I was smart enough, capable enough, and determined enough to succeed in medicine. The girl they had called unrealistic had become a woman who saved lives for a sigh. Living. But the real test was still coming. 2 years into my career as a paramedic with Riverside Fire Department, I thought I had found my balance. I worked rotating shifts at Station 19, responding to everything from minor injuries to major trauma calls. My confidence had grown with each successful resuscitation, each life saved, each family reunited with their loved ones because my partner David and I had arrived in time. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying. David and I had developed the kind of partnership that emergency responders dream about. We anticipated each other's moves, communicated without words, and handled even the most chaotic situations with calm efficiency. Our supervisor, Captain Lisa Thompson, had begun hinting about promotional opportunities and advanced training programs. My personal life had also stabilized in ways I hadn't expected. David and I had grown closer over months of working together, sharing the intense experiences that only first responders truly understand. Late-night conversations in the ambulance during quiet shifts had evolved into coffee dates between work periods, and eventually into a relationship that felt as natural as breathing. "You know what I love about you?" he said one evening as we sat in his apartment, reviewing case studies for an upcoming recertification exam. "You never doubt yourself when it matters. In the field, you're completely confident. It's only when you talk about your family that you start second-guessing everything." He was right. At work, I was paramedic Martinez, competent and decisive. But around my family, I still felt like the 18-year-old girl who had been told she wasn't smart enough for her dreams. Despite everything I had accomplished, despite the lives I had saved and the recognition I had earned, some part of me still craved their approval. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had become a strange ritual of polite pride mixed with subtle disappointment. They were genuinely proud of my career as a paramedic, but they also treated it as evidence that they had been right all along about medical school being unrealistic. "Jessica's doing so well with the fire department," my mother would tell visitors. Much more practical than all that pre-med nonsense she was obsessed with in college. Mike had married Ashley the previous year, and they had bought a small house 3 blocks from our parents. Ashley had been promoted to head nurse at the family clinic, and she had developed an annoying habit of offering career advice based on her own experience in healthcare. "You should think about going back to school," she said during one particularly memorable dinner. With your paramedic experience, you could probably get into a nurse practitioner program. That's almost like being a doctor, but more realistic. Almost like being a doctor had become the family's favorite phrase for describing any medical career that fell short of actually being a physician. Physician assistant was almost like being a doctor. Nurse practitioner was almost like being a doctor. Even my work as a paramedic was sometimes described as almost like being a doctor, but without all the school. The phrase irritated me more than I wanted to admit, but I had learned to smile and change the subject. I was 28 years old, financially independent, and successful in my chosen field. What my family thought about my career path shouldn't have mattered anymore. But it did matter, in ways I didn't fully understand until the day everything happened. The call came in on a Thursday afternoon in late October. David and I were finishing lunch at a taco stand near the station when our radios crackled to life. Unit 19, respond code 3 to 1247 Maple Street. 55-year-old female, cardiac arrest, CPR in progress. David was already moving toward the ambulance before the dispatcher finished speaking. I grabbed my radio and confirmed our response, while jogging after him. Unit 19 responding, ETA 4 minutes. It wasn't until we were racing through traffic with lights and sirens that the address registered in my consciousness. 1247 Maple Street. My parents' house. David, I said, my voice tight with sudden panic. That's my parents' address. He glanced at me while navigating around a slow-moving sedan. Are you sure? Positive. I grew up in that house. Okay, he said calmly. Here's what we're going to do. I'll take lead on this call. You assist, but you don't make decisions. Can you handle that? I nodded, though my hands were already shaking. In 3 years of emergency medicine, I had responded to hundreds of cardiac arrests. I knew the protocols by heart, could perform CPR and advanced life support without conscious thought. But this was different. This was my family. We pulled up to the familiar small house with its chipped paint and overgrown rose bushes. The front door was wide open and I could hear shouting from inside. Mike's truck was in the driveway along with Ashley's Honda. Whatever had happened, they were already here. David grabbed the cardiac monitor and drug bag while I wheeled the stretcher toward the house. My legs felt unsteady, but my training took over. Equipment check, scene assessment, prepare for immediate intervention. Inside, chaos. Mike was performing. Chest compressions on someone lying on the kitchen floor. His technique sloppy but determined. Ashley knelt beside him, holding a phone and speaking rapidly to what I assumed was the 911 dispatcher. My father stood against the wall, his face ashen, his hands pressed against his mouth. And on the floor, unconscious and unresponsive, was my mother. The sight hit me like a physical blow. Patricia Martinez, the woman who had worked every day for 15 years to keep our family fed and housed, lay motionless on the linoleum floor of her own kitchen. Her face was gray, her lips blue-tinged. Mike's compressions weren't deep enough, and there was no one managing her airway. Every instinct screamed at me to push everyone aside and take over, but David's hand on my shoulder reminded me of our agreement. "Mike, I need you to step back," David said firmly but kindly. "We've got this now." Mike looked up, saw me in my uniform, and his eyes widened. "Jessica?" "Oh God, Jessica," she just collapsed. We were having coffee and she grabbed her chest and then she just... "When did she lose consciousness?" David asked, already moving to assess her condition. "Maybe 3 minutes ago," Ashley said. "I called 911 immediately and started CPR." David nodded, positioning the cardiac monitor. "How long has CPR been in progress?" "Since I called," Ashley replied. "Maybe 2 minutes." I moved automatically, setting up the oxygen and preparing medications while David attached monitor leads. The familiar routine helped calm my racing heart. Check pulse, assess rhythm, establish airway, begin advanced life support protocols. The monitor showed ventricular fibrillation. My mother's heart was quivering uselessly instead of pumping blood to her brain and organs. Without immediate intervention, she would die within minutes. "V-fib," David announced. "Charging to 200 joules. Everyone clear." I made sure no one was touching my mother while David prepared the defibrillator. This was the moment that would determine everything. If the shock converted her heart rhythm back to normal, she had a chance. If not, we would have to continue. CPR and try again. "Clear," David called. The shock made my mother's body convulse slightly. We all stared at the monitor, waiting for the new rhythm to appear. Normal sinus rhythm. Strong, regular heartbeats at 90 beats per minute. "We've got her back," David said quietly. But getting her heart beating again was only the first step. She was still unconscious, still not breathing on her own. We needed to get her to the hospital immediately for advanced cardiac care. "Jessica, I need you to bag her while I get the stretcher," David instructed. I knelt beside my mother and began ventilating her with the bag mask device, forcing oxygen into her lungs with careful, measured breaths. Her face was still pale, but color was beginning to return to her lips. "Is she going to be okay?" my father asked, his voice breaking. "We need to get her to the hospital," I said, focusing on maintaining her airway. "David, what's our ETA to St. Mary's?" 6 minutes with traffic, he replied, maneuvering the stretcher through the narrow doorway. We transferred my mother carefully, securing her to the stretcher and continuing ventilation during transport. I rode in the back with her while David drove, monitoring her vital signs and administering medications to support her blood pressure and heart rhythm. During the ride, my mother began to regain consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, and she tried to speak around the oxygen mask. "Mom, don't try to talk," I said, taking her hand. "You had a heart attack, but you're stable now. We're taking you to the hospital." She squeezed my hand weakly, and I saw recognition in her eyes. She knew who I was. She understood what had happened. At St. Mary's Emergency Department, we transferred care to the cardiac team. Dr. Sarah Williams, the attending physician, was someone I had worked with on numerous cases. She knew my reputation and trusted my assessment of the situation. "What do we have?" she asked as we wheeled my mother into the trauma bay. 55-year-old female, witnessed cardiac arrest with immediate CPR, David reported. Presented in V-fib, successfully converted with single shock. Regained consciousness during transport. Blood pressure stable at 110/70. Heart rate 88. Oxygen saturation 98% on high-flow oxygen. Dr. Williams began her examination while the nursing staff connected my mother to the hospital's monitoring equipment. "Paramedic Martinez, this is your mother, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good work out there. Quick response and proper protocols." Probably saved her life. The next few hours were a blur of tests, consultations, and waiting. My mother was admitted to the cardiac intensive care unit for monitoring and treatment. The cardiologist, Dr. Patel, explained that she had suffered a major heart attack caused by a blocked coronary artery, but the quick response had prevented significant damage to her heart muscle. "She's going to need surgery," he told our family, as we gathered in the ICU waiting room. "We'll perform an angioplasty tomorrow to open the blocked artery and insert a stent. The prognosis is good, but recovery will take several weeks." My father, who had been silent since arriving at the hospital, finally spoke. If Jessica and David hadn't gotten there so fast, she probably wouldn't have survived, Dr. Patel confirmed. "Cardiac arrest has a very low survival rate, especially when it occurs outside a hospital. Your daughter's quick response and advanced training made the difference." That evening, after my mother was stable and resting comfortably, the family gathered in the hospital cafeteria. We were all emotionally drained, but relieved that the immediate crisis had passed. "I can't believe you saved Mom's life," Mike said, shaking his head. "I mean, I know what you do for work, but seeing it happen to our family, that's what we train for," I replied. Any paramedic would have done the same thing. No, Ashley said quietly. Not any paramedic. I've worked in healthcare for 5 years, and I've seen good paramedics and bad ones. What you did today, the way you stayed calm and focused when it was your own mother, that takes something special. My father looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't just pride or gratitude. It was something deeper. Recognition. All these years, he said slowly, we kept telling you to be realistic. We kept saying medical school was too hard, that you weren't smart enough. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted. We were wrong. Not just about medical school, but about you. We couldn't see what you were capable of because we'd never seen anyone in our family do what you were trying to do. We let our own limitations define what we thought was possible for you. My mother was released from the hospital 5 days. Later, with strict instructions for cardiac rehabilitation and lifestyle changes. The surgery had been successful, and her prognosis was excellent. But more importantly, something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. For the first time in my adult life, my parents saw me not as their little girl with unrealistic dreams, but as a competent professional who had literally saved a life that mattered most to them. The change wasn't immediate or dramatic, but it was undeniable. When I came to Sunday dinner the following week, my father asked detailed questions about my work, wanting to understand the technical aspects of emergency medicine. My mother talked proudly about her daughter, the paramedic, to anyone who would listen. Even Mike and Ashley seemed to view me differently. The condescending comments about finding more realistic careers stopped entirely. Instead, they asked for my opinion on medical matters and seemed genuinely interested in my professional experiences. I owe you an apology, Ashley said one evening as we sat together in my mother's living room while she napped in her recliner. I've been treating you like you were playing doctor instead of actually being a medical professional. I think I felt threatened by your ambitions because they made my own achievements seem smaller. Your achievements aren't small, I replied. We're both in healthcare. We're both helping people. But you saved my mother-in-law's life, she said. And you did it with skills I don't have and training I couldn't handle. I need to respect that instead of trying to diminish it. The conversation with my parents that truly changed everything happened 2 weeks after my mother's surgery. We were sitting at the kitchen table where they had first told me I wasn't smart enough for medical school. But this time the dynamic was completely different. Jessica, my mother said, we need to talk about your future. I tensed slightly, remembering similar conversations from the past. What about it? We know you've been thinking about medical school again, my father said. David mentioned that you've been studying for the MCAT. I had been studying for the medical college admission test, but quietly, without mentioning it to my family. David had encouraged me to pursue my original dream, pointing out that my experience as a paramedic would make me a stronger candidate than I had been straight out of college. I've been considering it, I admitted. Why didn't you tell us? My mother asked. Because I didn't want to have the same conversation we've had a dozen times about being realistic and practical. My parents exchanged a look, but this time it was different from the worried glances of the past. 10 years ago, we told you that you weren't smart enough for medical school, my father said. We thought we were protecting you from disappointment. We thought we knew your limitations better than you did. We were wrong, my mother added. Not just wrong about your abilities, but wrong about our role as your parents. We should have been supporting your dreams, not trying to convince you to settle for less. You're 28 years old, my father continued. You've proven yourself as a paramedic. You understand emergency medicine better than most people, and you have the work ethic and intelligence to succeed in any program you choose. If you want to apply to medical school, we support you completely. The words I had waited a decade to hear finally came, but they felt different than I had imagined. The validation was meaningful, but it wasn't the desperate need for approval that had driven me as a teenager. I had already proven to myself that I belonged in medicine. Their support was welcome, but it wasn't necessary for my self-worth. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." "What kind of doctor do you want to be?" my mother asked. "Emergency medicine," I replied without hesitation. "I love the variety, the challenge, the chance to help people in crisis situations. I want to be the doctor who's there when everything goes wrong." "Like you were for me," my mother said softly. "Like I was for you." Over the next few months, I threw myself into MCAT preparation with the same intensity I had brought to paramedic training. But this time, I had advantages I hadn't possessed as an undergraduate. I had real-world medical experience, confidence in my abilities, and a clear understanding of what I wanted to achieve. I also had support from unexpected sources. My parents asked about my study progress and offered to help with expenses. Mike and Ashley provided encouragement instead of skepticism. David quizzed me on practice questions during slow shifts at work. Most importantly, I had Captain Lisa Thompson's mentorship. She had completed medical school herself before choosing a career in fire department administration, and she understood both the challenges and the rewards of pursuing advanced medical education. "You're going to be an excellent physician," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed my application materials. "You have something that can't be taught in medical school: the ability to stay calm under pressure and make good decisions when lives are at stake." When I received my MCAT scores 6 weeks later, I was amazed at how much I had improved since my undergraduate years. A score that would have been competitive at any medical school in the country. But more than the number was what it represented. Proof that I had been right about my own capabilities all along. Evidence that the girl they had called not smart enough had become a woman who could compete with anyone. The day I submitted my medical school applications, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with acceptance or rejection. I had honored the promise I had made to myself at 18, when I first decided to pursue medicine despite my family's doubts. Whether or not I was accepted, I had already succeeded in the most important way. I had never given up on myself, even when everyone else had given up on me. 3 months later, on a cold Tuesday morning in February, I received the call that changed everything again. "Ms. Martinez? This is Dr. Jennifer Hayes from the UC San Diego School of Medicine. I'm calling to inform you that you've been accepted into our medical program for the fall semester." I was sitting in the ambulance, with David parked outside a Starbucks between calls, when the phone rang. The words didn't immediately register. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" "You've been accepted to medical school," Dr. Hayes said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "We were particularly impressed with your emergency medicine experience and your personal statement about serving underserved communities. We'd like to offer you a position in our class of 2028. I looked at David, who was watching my face with growing excitement. "I got in," I whispered. "You got in!" he shouted, loud enough that people in the coffee shop turned to look at our ambulance. That evening, I drove to my parents' house to share the news in person. They were both home, sitting at the kitchen table where so many important conversations had taken place. "I have something to tell you," I said, sitting down across from them. "What is it, mija?" my mother asked. "I got accepted to medical school, UC San Diego. I start in September." The silence lasted for several seconds. Then my father stood up, walked around the table, and pulled me into the tightest hug I had ever received from him. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, and I could feel his tears on my shoulder. "So proud, and so sorry it took me so long to believe in you." My mother joined the embrace, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely accepted by my family. Not just tolerated or politely supported, but truly celebrated for who I was and what I had achieved. Later that evening, Mike and Ashley came over to congratulate me. The conversation was warm and genuine, without any of the subtle condescension that had characterized our interactions for years. "Dr. Martinez," Mike said, grinning, "has a nice ring to it." "It's going to be a long 4 years," I replied, "and then residency after that." "But you'll make it," Ashley said confidently. "After everything you've already accomplished, medical school is just the next step." The phrase that struck me most was, "just the next step." For the first time, my family was treating my medical ambitions as inevitable rather than unlikely. They saw medical school not as an impossible dream, but as a logical progression in a career that had already proven my capabilities. As I drove home that night, I thought about the 18-year-old girl who had sat at that same kitchen table and been told she wasn't smart enough for her dreams. She couldn't have imagined the journey that lay ahead, the years of doubt and struggle, the gradual building of confidence and skill, the moment when she would kneel over her mother's unconscious body and use everything she had learned to bring her back to life. She couldn't have imagined that her parents would eventually look at her with pride instead of worry, that her siblings would ask for her medical opinion, that her colleagues would respect her expertise. Most importantly, she couldn't have imagined how good it would feel to prove herself right about her own potential. But as I parked outside my apartment and looked up at the stars, I realized that the validation I had craved for so long wasn't the most important thing I had gained. The most important thing was the knowledge that I had never given up on myself, even when it would have been easier to accept other people's limitations. I had learned that intelligence isn't just about test scores or grades. It's about persistence, adaptability, and the courage to keep pursuing your goals even when no one else believes in them. The girl they had called not smart enough had become a woman who saved lives. And in 4 years, she would become Dr. Jessica Martinez, emergency physician. But even without the title, she had already proven everything she needed to prove. Medical school began in September with an intensity that surpassed anything I had experienced as a paramedic. The first week alone involved more reading than I had done in entire semesters during my undergraduate years. Anatomy textbooks the size of phone books, pharmacology guides that required memorizing thousands of drug interactions, and pathophysiology concepts that connected every system in the human body in ways I was only beginning to understand. But, unlike my undergraduate struggles, this time I approached the challenge with unshakable confidence. I was no longer the uncertain 18-year-old who had been told she wasn't smart enough. I was a 28-year-old paramedic who had saved lives, managed crises, and proven her capabilities in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. My classmates at UC San Diego were brilliant, accomplished, and driven. Many had graduated summa cum laude from prestigious universities, conducted groundbreaking research, or earned advanced degrees in other fields. On paper, their credentials far exceeded mine. But I possessed something that couldn't be measured by transcripts or test scores: real-world medical experience. While my classmates struggled to visualize anatomical concepts, I could relate every structure to procedures I had performed in the field. When we studied cardiac rhythms, I had already interpreted thousands of EKGs on actual patients. When we learned about shock physiology, I had treated hypotensive patients and understood how different interventions affected blood pressure in real time. My first-year study group quickly discovered that I was an invaluable resource for translating textbook theory into practical understanding. Dr. Amanda Foster, our anatomy professor, often called on me to describe how various structures felt during actual medical procedures. "Ms. Martinez," she said during a lecture on airway anatomy, "can you describe what the cricothyroid membrane feels like when you're performing an emergency surgical airway?" I stood up, remembering a particularly difficult call from 2 years earlier. "It's a small depression between the thyroid and cricoid cartilages, about the width of your thumb. When you're working on someone in respiratory distress, you have to palpate carefully because the anatomy can be distorted by swelling or trauma." The membrane itself feels like a thin patch of slightly softer tissue compared to the cartilage around it. The lecture hall was silent as my classmates absorbed this real-world detail that no textbook could adequately convey. These moments became common throughout our first year, and I gradually realized that my unconventional path to medical school had given me advantages that traditional students lacked. My relationship with David had evolved to accommodate the demands of medical school. He remained in Riverside, working as a paramedic supervisor, while I lived in San Diego during the week and drove home on weekends. The distance was challenging, but our shared understanding of emergency medicine created a bond that transcended physical proximity. "How's the studying going?" he would ask during our nightly phone calls. "Brutal, but manageable," I would reply. "Today we learned about cardiac electrophysiology. I kept thinking about that V-fib arrest we worked last month, the one where the patient needed 3 shocks before we got a stable rhythm." "That's the difference between you and your classmates," David observed. "They're learning about cardiac rhythms from books. You're connecting textbook knowledge to actual patients you've helped save." My family's transformation continued to amaze me. My parents, who had once viewed my educational ambitions with skepticism, now bragged to anyone who would listen about their daughter in medical school. My mother had even started a small photo album featuring pictures of me in my white coat, my stethoscope around my neck, and screenshots of my name on the UC San Diego Medical School website. "Our Jessica is going to be a doctor," she would tell grocery store clerks, bank tellers, and complete strangers with a pride that felt both overwhelming and deeply healing. Mike had become one of my most enthusiastic supporters. He would call periodically to check on my progress and often asked technical questions about automotive-related injuries he encountered in his work. "Jess, I had a customer come in yesterday with a crush injury to his hand from working under a car hood," he said during one of our conversations. "The hand looked pretty bad, and I was thinking about what you told me about compartment syndrome. Should I have insisted he go to the emergency room instead of just wrapping it up?" These conversations represented a complete reversal from our earlier dynamic. Instead of dismissing my medical knowledge, Mike was actively seeking it out and applying it to help people in his own community. Ashley had perhaps undergone the most significant change in her attitude toward my career. She had enrolled in a nurse practitioner program herself, inspired partly by watching my journey to medical school. Our conversations now centered on shared challenges in advanced medical education, rather than her attempts to convince me to lower my expectations. "I used to think that being a paramedic was impressive enough and that you were being greedy by wanting more," she admitted during a family dinner in November. "I realize now that I was projecting my own fears about not being smart enough for higher-level medical training. Watching you succeed gave me the courage to challenge myself too." The academic rigor of medical school was exactly what I had hoped it would be. Every day brought new concepts that expanded my understanding of human physiology, disease processes, and therapeutic interventions. But more importantly, every day confirmed that I belonged in this environment. My grades placed me in the top quarter of my class, and my professors began suggesting research opportunities and specialized tracks that could enhance my future residency applications. Dr. Robert Chen, the emergency medicine department chair, approached me in December with an offer that would shape the next phase of my education. "Jessica, I've been following your academic progress and I'm impressed," he said as we sat in his office overlooking the medical campus. "More importantly, I've heard about your paramedic background and your performance in clinical simulations. Would you be interested in joining our emergency medicine research track?" The research track was a competitive program that allowed selected students to work directly with emergency department faculty on cutting-edge projects while gaining early clinical exposure. Only 10 first-year students were chosen each year, and the experience provided significant advantages for residency matching. "What kind of research would I be involved in?" I asked. "We're conducting a multi-center study on pre-hospital cardiac arrest outcomes," Dr. Chen explained. Your paramedic experience would provide unique insights into the challenges of field resuscitation and the factors that influence patient survival. You would help design protocols, analyze data, and potentially present findings at national conferences. The opportunity was perfect. It combined my clinical experience with academic research, positioning me for a strong emergency medicine residency application while contributing to knowledge that could improve patient outcomes across the country. "I'm very interested," I said immediately. "Excellent. The program begins in January, and you'll be working with Dr. Maria Santos, our Director of Emergency Medicine Research. She's particularly excited to work with someone who has your field experience." Starting the research track added another layer of complexity to my already demanding schedule, but it also provided the kind of intellectual stimulation I had craved throughout my undergraduate years. Instead of simply memorizing facts for exams, I was contributing to the advancement of medical knowledge in areas where I had direct experience. My first research project involved analyzing data from cardiac arrest cases across 15 different emergency medical systems. My job was to identify patterns in pre-hospital care that correlated with improved survival rates. Having performed CPR and advanced life support on dozens of cardiac arrest patients, I could interpret the data in ways that researchers without field experience might miss. "This is fascinating," I told Dr. Santos during one of our weekly meetings. "The data shows that survival rates are significantly higher when paramedics achieve return of spontaneous circulation within the first 6 minutes of arrival on scene. But what the data doesn't capture is how scene dynamics affect that timeline." "What do you mean?" she asked. "If the arrest happens in a crowded restaurant, it takes longer to set up equipment and establish working space. If it happens in a bedroom on the second floor, you lose time moving the patient to a location where you can work effectively. If family members are hysterical, you have to manage their emotions while performing medical procedures. These variables aren't captured in the data, but they have huge impacts on outcomes." Dr. Santos leaned forward, intrigued. "How would you suggest we account for those factors?" "We could develop a scene complexity scoring system," I proposed. "Rate each case based on factors like location accessibility, crowd presence, family dynamics, and other environmental challenges. Then correlate those scores with response times and outcomes." "That's brilliant," she said. "No one has ever attempted to quantify scene complexity in cardiac arrest research. This could be groundbreaking." Working on the scene complexity project throughout my first year gave me a sense of purpose that extended beyond personal achievement. I was using my unique background to contribute insights that could potentially save lives across multiple emergency medical systems. The project also brought me into contact with paramedics, EMTs, and emergency physicians from around the country. Many were surprised to learn about my transition from field work to medical school, and their reactions reinforced how unusual my path had been. "You went from being a paramedic to medical school?" asked Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an emergency physician from Denver who was collaborating on our research. "That's incredibly rare. Most people see those as separate career tracks." "I always viewed paramedic work as preparation for becoming a physician," I explained. "The clinical experience gave me confidence that I could handle the challenges of medical practice." "That experience is going to make you an exceptional emergency doctor," she said. "You'll understand the entire continuum of emergency care in ways that most physicians never do." As my first year of medical school progressed, I began to understand that my unconventional background was more than just an interesting personal story. It was a significant professional advantage that would influence every aspect of my medical career. During clinical skills training, I performed procedures with a level of confidence that impressed my instructors, while my classmates nervously attempted their first blood draws and IV insertions. I worked with the smooth efficiency of someone who had performed these procedures hundreds of times under much more challenging conditions. "Ms. Martinez," said Dr. Patricia Kim during a clinical skills assessment, "your technique is remarkably polished for a first-year student. You approach procedures with a level of calm that typically takes years to develop. I've had a lot of practice, I replied. Starting IVs in the back of a moving ambulance on a hypotensive patient teaches you to work efficiently under pressure. These moments of recognition were gratifying, but they also reminded me of how much my family's initial skepticism had cost me. If I had pursued medical school directly after undergraduate studies, I would have lacked the clinical foundation that now made everything easier. If my parents had supported my dreams from the beginning, I might have taken a more traditional path and missed the invaluable experience that set me apart from my peers. In a strange way, their doubts had ultimately strengthened my qualifications for medical practice. The years they saw as wasted pursuing an unrealistic goal had actually been essential preparation for the challenges ahead. My second year brought the transition from classroom learning to clinical rotations, and I approached this phase with excitement that bordered on euphoria. After 2 decades of wanting to work as a physician, I was finally going to practice medicine under the supervision of attending doctors. My first rotation was internal medicine at UC San Diego Medical Center. The pace was demanding, with 12-hour days that began at 5 a.m. and often extended well into the evening. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt energized by the constant learning opportunities and patient interactions. Dr. Michael Torres, the attending physician supervising my team, noticed my enthusiasm during our first week together. "Jessica, you seem remarkably comfortable for a second-year student just starting clinical rotations," he observed. "Most students are intimidated by their first real patient interactions." "I've been taking care of patients for years as a paramedic," I explained. "The setting is different, but the fundamental skills are the same." "That makes sense. Your patient presentation skills are already quite polished. Have you considered what specialty you want to pursue?" "Emergency medicine," I said without hesitation. "Given your background, that seems like a natural fit. Have you connected with Dr. Chen in the emergency department?" "Yes, I've been working on research projects with his department since my first year." "Excellent. Emergency medicine residency is highly competitive, but you have advantages that most applicants lack. Your clinical experience gives you credibility that's difficult to achieve through academic work alone." The validation from experienced physicians continued throughout my clinical rotations. During my surgery rotation, I impressed the surgical team with my ability to anticipate needs and maintain composure during high-stress procedures. On my pediatrics rotation, I connected easily with young patients and their families, drawing on years of experience calming people during medical emergencies. But it was during my emergency medicine rotation that I truly felt I had found my calling. The controlled chaos of a busy emergency department, the variety of cases, the need for rapid decision-making under pressure, everything about emergency medicine felt like a natural extension of my paramedic work. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the attending who supervised my emergency medicine rotation, became an important mentor during this period. "Jessica, I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years, and I've never seen a student adapt to the emergency department environment as quickly as you have," she told me during my second week on the service. "You move through the department like you've been working here for years." "In many ways, I have been," I replied. "I've brought patients to this emergency department dozens of times as a paramedic. I know the layout, the staff, and the procedures." "It's more than familiarity," Dr. Mitchell said. "You have an intuitive understanding of emergency medicine workflow and patient prioritization. You can walk into a room and immediately assess what needs to happen next. That's a skill that usually takes years to develop." During that rotation, I had the opportunity to work with many of the paramedics who brought patients to our emergency department. Their reactions to seeing me in a white coat were uniformly positive and often emotional. "Martinez!" called Tony Ramirez, a paramedic I had worked with several times during my years with Riverside Fire. "I heard you were in medical school, but seeing you here as a student doctor is incredible. You made it." "I'm still making it," I corrected with a smile. 2 more years of medical school, then residency. But you're here, he said. You're working as a doctor. That's amazing. These encounters with my former colleagues reinforced how unusual my journey had been. The transition from paramedic to physician was rare enough that it attracted attention and respect throughout the medical community. My emergency medicine rotation also provided opportunities to work with patients who had been transported by ambulance, and I found that my paramedic background gave me unique insights into their care. During one particularly busy shift, we received a cardiac arrest patient who had been down for 12 minutes before paramedics achieved return of spontaneous circulation. The patient arrived unconscious and on a ventilator, and the prognosis was uncertain. "What do you think about this case?" Dr. Mitchell asked as we reviewed the patient's condition. The paramedic report said they had to work in a crowded apartment with multiple family members present, I said. That probably delayed their ability to establish effective CPR and advanced airway management. 12 minutes of downtime is significant. But if they were doing high-quality compressions for most of that period, neurological recovery is still possible. "How do you know about the scene conditions?" she asked. I always read the paramedic report carefully, and I know how to interpret the environmental factors that affect field care. Most physicians focus on the medical interventions, but scene dynamics have huge impacts on patient outcomes. Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. That perspective is invaluable. We often receive limited information about pre-hospital care, but understanding those factors helps us make better treatment decisions. The patient ultimately made a full neurological recovery, an outcome that validated my assessment of the pre-hospital care quality despite the prolonged downtime. As my second year progressed, I began preparing for residency applications with the same methodical approach I had brought to every other phase of my medical education. My grades were strong, my research experience was extensive, and my clinical evaluations consistently praised my patient care skills and professional maturity. But most importantly, I had a clear sense of purpose that extended beyond personal achievement. I wanted to become an emergency physician who could bridge the gap between pre-hospital and hospital care, who understood the entire continuum of emergency medicine, and who could train the next generation of medical professionals to work effectively with emergency medical services. Dr. Chen called me into his office in March to discuss my residency planning strategy. "Jessica, your application is going to be very competitive," he said. "Your grades are excellent, your research productivity is impressive, and your clinical evaluations are outstanding. But your paramedic background is what's going to set you apart from other applicants." "How should I highlight that experience in my application?" I asked. "Tell your story," he said simply. "Explain how your journey from paramedic to physician has shaped your understanding of emergency medicine. Residency directors want to see candidates who bring unique perspectives and experiences to their programs. Any specific programs you'd recommend?" "Given your background and research interests, I think you should consider academic medical centers with strong emergency medical services components. Places like UCSF, UCLA, University of Washington, and Johns Hopkins have programs that would value your experience." "What about staying here at UCSD?" "Absolutely apply here, but don't limit yourself. Your credentials make you competitive at top programs nationwide, and different environments will offer different opportunities for growth." The application process was intense but exciting. Writing my personal statement gave me an opportunity to reflect on the journey that had brought me from an 18-year-old girl told she wasn't smart enough for medical school to a confident medical student preparing for emergency medicine residency. I wrote about the night I saved a customer's life at Denny's and how that experience showed me I belonged in emergency medicine. I described the day I knelt over my mother's unconscious body and used my medical training to bring her back to life. I explained how my paramedic experience had shaped my understanding of patient care and given me perspectives that traditional medical students lacked. But most importantly, I wrote about the lessons I had learned about persistence, self-confidence, and the importance of never allowing other people's limitations to define your own potential. When I submitted my residency applications in September of my third year, I felt the same sense of completion I had experienced when applying to medical school. Regardless of the outcomes, I had honored my commitment to myself and pursued my goals with unwavering determination. The interview invitations began arriving in October, and I was thrilled to receive offers from 12 programs, including several of the top emergency medicine residencies in the country. Each interview provided an opportunity to share my story and explain how my unique background would contribute to their program. At UCSF, the residency director told me, "We've never had an applicant with your combination of clinical experience and academic achievement. You bring a perspective that would enrich our program immeasurably." At UCLA, the faculty emphasized how my research on scene complexity could influence emergency medical services training nationwide. At Johns Hopkins, they were interested in my potential for leadership roles in emergency medicine education and EMS system development. But it was during my interview at the University of Washington that I found the program that felt like home. Their emphasis on rural and underserved emergency medicine, combined with their strong EMS research programs, aligned perfectly with my long-term career goals. Dr. Lisa Park, the residency director, explained their program philosophy during my interview. "We train emergency physicians who can work effectively in any environment, from major trauma centers to rural emergency departments," she said. "Your paramedic background gives you skills that many of our residents don't develop until late in their training. You already understand how to work with limited resources, how to make critical decisions under pressure, and how to communicate effectively with emergency medical services." That experience has definitely shaped how I approach patient care. I agreed. "We also value your research background. Our EMS research division could benefit enormously from someone who understands both the academic and clinical sides of emergency medicine." The conversation continued for over an hour, and I left feeling confident that this was where I wanted to spend the next 3 years of my training. Match day arrived in March, with the same nervous excitement that had characterized every major milestone in my medical education. Medical students across the country gathered to learn where they would spend their residency training, the culmination of years of preparation and dreaming. I sat with my classmates in the UC San Diego auditorium, holding an envelope that contained the next chapter of my professional life. When the dean gave the signal to open our match letters, my hands shook slightly as I tore through the paper. University of Washington Emergency Medicine Residency Program. I had matched at my top choice, the program that would allow me to develop into the kind of emergency physician I had always wanted to become. The celebration with my classmates was joyful, but the real celebration happened that evening when I called my family to share the news. "We're so proud of you," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "Dr. Jessica Martinez, emergency medicine resident at the University of Washington. It sounds perfect." "It does sound perfect," my father added. "You've worked so hard for this, mija. You deserve every bit of this success." Mike's reaction was characteristically enthusiastic. "My sister, the doctor. This is incredible, Jess. You went from saving Mom's life as a paramedic to becoming the kind of doctor who trains other people to save lives." But it was Ashley's comment that touched me most deeply. "You know what I admire most about your journey?" she said. "You never let anyone else's opinion of your capabilities limit what you believed you could achieve. You proved that the only person who gets to decide how smart you are is you." As I hung up the phone and sat in my apartment, looking out at the San Diego skyline, I thought about the girl who had sat at her parents' kitchen table 10 years earlier and been told she wasn't smart enough for medical school. That girl couldn't have imagined the path that lay ahead, the years of struggle and growth, the moments of doubt and triumph, the relationships that would shape her journey, and the day she would save her own mother's life using skills her family had once thought were beyond her reach. She couldn't have imagined that her parents would eventually see her not as their overly ambitious daughter, but as their accomplished physician daughter whose dreams had become reality through determination and hard work. Most importantly, she couldn't have imagined how it would feel to prove that intelligence isn't fixed, that potential isn't predetermined, and that the most important voice in determining what you can achieve is your own. In 6 weeks, I would graduate from medical school and begin my emergency medicine residency. In 3 years, I would become Dr. Jessica Martinez, emergency physician. But in the truest sense, I had already become everything I had dreamed of being. The girl they called not smart enough had become a woman who would spend her career proving that intelligence, determination, and compassion could overcome any obstacle. 3 years of emergency medicine residency at the University of Washington transformed me from a medical school graduate with paramedic experience into a fully qualified emergency physician. The training was relentless, demanding, and exactly what I had hoped it would be. 12-hour shifts that stretched to 14 hours, overnight calls that tested every limit of human endurance, and patient cases that challenged everything I thought I knew about medicine. But unlike the struggles of my undergraduate years, this challenge felt like coming home. Every shift in the emergency department reinforced that I had found my calling. The controlled chaos, the constant variety, the opportunity to be the first doctor people saw during their worst moments, everything about emergency medicine aligned with who I had become. Dr. Amanda Richards, my senior attending during my final year of residency, pulled me aside one evening after a particularly challenging shift. "Jessica, I've been thinking about your career trajectory," she said as we sat in the quiet break room at 3 a.m. "Your clinical skills are exceptional, but more importantly, you have something that can't be taught. You understand emergency medicine from a systems perspective that most physicians never develop." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where the conversation was heading. "You see the entire continuum of emergency care, from the initial 911 call through hospital discharge. Most emergency physicians have never worked in the field, so they don't fully understand the challenges paramedics face or how pre-hospital decisions affect emergency department care. That perspective makes you uniquely qualified for leadership roles." The conversation was timely because I had been considering my options after residency completion. Several emergency departments had offered me attending positions, and I had also received an inquiry from the University of Washington about joining their faculty as an assistant professor focused on emergency medical services education. "Have you thought about academics?" Dr. Richards continued. "Your research background and clinical experience would make you an excellent teacher. Plus, we need more physicians who can bridge the gap between emergency medicine and EMS." The academic track appealed to me for several reasons. Teaching would allow me to influence the next generation of emergency physicians and paramedics, ensuring they understood how to work together effectively. Research opportunities would let me continue investigating questions that could improve emergency care across entire systems, and the university setting would provide resources for larger projects that could have national impact. "I'm definitely interested," I said. "What would that position involve?" "Teaching medical students and residents, conducting EMS research, and probably developing new curricula that incorporate pre-hospital perspectives. Dr. Harrison has been wanting to expand our EMS education programs for years, but we needed someone with your background to make it happen." Dr. Michael Harrison was the department chair and a nationally recognized leader in emergency medicine. The opportunity to work directly with him was too valuable to pass up. 2 weeks later, I sat in Dr. Harrison's office discussing the assistant professor position in detail. "Jessica, your unique background positions you to address some critical gaps in emergency medicine education," he explained. "Most medical schools barely touch on pre-hospital care, so physicians graduate with limited understanding of EMS capabilities and limitations. That disconnect affects patient care quality and system efficiency. I've definitely noticed that disconnect during my training," I agreed. Physicians sometimes have unrealistic expectations about what paramedics can accomplish in the field, and paramedics sometimes feel like their assessments aren't valued by hospital staff. Exactly. We want to develop educational programs that improve collaboration between emergency physicians and EMS personnel. Your experience on both sides of that relationship makes you the ideal person to lead this initiative. The position would involve teaching responsibilities, research funding, and the freedom to develop innovative educational approaches. More importantly, it would allow me to continue learning while contributing to the advancement of emergency medicine as a specialty. When would you want me to start? I asked. July 1st, right after you complete residency. We're planning to announce a new EMS fellowship program, and we'd like you to help design the curriculum and serve as one of the core faculty members. The opportunity was perfect. Instead of simply practicing emergency medicine, I would be shaping how future emergency physicians and paramedics were trained to work together. I accepted the position immediately. Graduation from residency took place on a sunny June morning with my entire family in attendance. My parents had flown up from California, along with Mike, Ashley, and their 2 young children. David had taken time off from his supervisor position with Riverside Fire to be there, and even Captain Lisa Thompson had made the trip to witness my transition from paramedic to physician. Dr. Jessica Martinez, the residency director announced, as I crossed the stage to receive my certificate of completion. The title still felt surreal, even after 3 years of preparation. The celebration dinner that evening was held at a restaurant overlooking Puget Sound, with views of the Olympic Mountains in the distance. As I looked around the table at the people who had supported my journey, I felt overwhelmed by gratitude for how much had changed since that kitchen table conversation 10 years earlier. "I want to propose a toast," my father said, standing up with his wine glass. "To Jessica, who taught us that believing in yourself is more important than having other people believe in you. You proved that determination and hard work can overcome any obstacle, including parents who didn't understand what you were capable of." To Dr. Martinez, Mike added, "who saved our mother's life and then went on to become the kind of doctor who will save thousands of other lives." But it was my mother's words that meant the most to me. "Mija, 10 years ago we told you that medical school was unrealistic, that you weren't smart enough for such a difficult path. We were wrong about everything except one thing. You are extraordinary, but not because you became a doctor. You were extraordinary all along, and we just didn't see it." The conversation continued late into the evening, with stories about my childhood determination, memories of my early struggles in college, and amazement at how the girl they had tried to protect from disappointment had become a woman who exceeded every expectation. David and I had announced our engagement 6 months earlier, and we were planning a wedding for the following spring. He had been accepted into a fire department leadership program in Seattle, which would allow us to build our life together while pursuing careers that complemented each other perfectly. "You know what I love most about our relationship?" he said, as we walked along the waterfront after dinner. "We both chose careers focused on helping people during emergencies, but we bring different perspectives to the same mission. You understand the medical complexity of emergency situations, and I understand the operational challenges of pre-hospital care. Together, we see the entire picture." Starting my faculty position at the University of Washington felt like the beginning of a new chapter, rather than the end of a long journey. My office was located in the emergency medicine department, with windows overlooking the medical campus where I had completed my residency training. My first major project involved developing a curriculum that would require all emergency medicine residents to complete rotations with local EMS agencies. The goal was to ensure that future emergency physicians understood the challenges and capabilities of paramedic care. "This is revolutionary," said Dr. Patricia Wong, the residency training director, as we reviewed the proposed curriculum. "No emergency medicine program in the country requires EMS rotations for all residents." That's exactly why we need to do it, I replied. Emergency physicians make decisions every day that affect EMS operations, but most have never worked in the field. This rotation will give them perspective they can't get anywhere else. The curriculum development process required collaboration with multiple EMS agencies throughout the Seattle area. As I met with paramedic supervisors and fire department officials, I was struck by how enthusiastic they were about the partnership. Finally, someone who understands both sides, said Captain Robert Kim from Seattle Fire Department. We've been trying to improve communication between EMS and emergency departments for years, but it's hard when physicians don't really understand what we do. The pilot program launched 6 months later with the first cohort of emergency medicine, residents spending 2 weeks each with different EMS agencies. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive from both residents and paramedics. I had no idea how complex pre-hospital decision-making could be, said Dr. Sarah Chen, a second-year resident who completed her EMS rotation with King County Medic 1. Working a cardiac arrest in someone's living room is completely different from working one in a hospital code room. The equipment limitations, space constraints, and family dynamics create challenges I never considered. The program's success led to invitations from other medical schools interested in developing similar curricula. Within 2 years, I was consulting with emergency medicine programs across the country, helping them design educational experiences that bridge the gap between hospital and pre-hospital care. My research focus expanded to include studies on communication patterns between EMS and emergency departments, the impact of pre-hospital interventions on emergency department efficiency, and the development of new protocols that optimized care across the entire emergency response system. One particularly rewarding project involved analyzing communication failures that contributed to adverse patient outcomes. By reviewing cases where information was lost or misinterpreted during patient handoffs from paramedics to emergency department staff, we identified specific training needs that could prevent future problems. This research has the potential to save lives, Dr. Harrison told me during one of our monthly faculty meetings. Communication breakdowns are one of the leading causes of medical errors in emergency settings, but no one has systematically studied the EMS to hospital interface before. The study results were published in the Journal of Emergency Medicine and led to invitations to present at national conferences. More importantly, several EMS systems implemented our communication protocols and reported measurable improvements in patient care quality. 3 years into my faculty position, I received an unexpected phone call that would create another full-circle moment in my career. Dr. Martinez, this is Chief Patricia Rodriguez from Riverside Fire Department. I hope you remember me. I'm Lisa Thompson's replacement as department chief. Of course, Chief Rodriguez. How can I help you? We're developing a new paramedic training program, and we'd like you to serve as our medical director. Captain Thompson recommended you specifically because of your unique background and your work in EMS education. The opportunity to return to Riverside as medical director for the fire department where I had started my emergency medicine career felt like destiny. The position would involve overseeing paramedic training, developing clinical protocols, and ensuring quality assurance for all EMS operations. I'm very interested, I said. What would the time commitment involve? We're looking for someone who can spend 2 days per month in Riverside, working directly with our paramedics and training staff. The rest of the work could be done remotely, reviewing cases and updating protocols. David was enthusiastic about the opportunity when I discussed it with him that evening. It's perfect, he said. You'll be able to influence EMS operations in the community where you grew up, while continuing your university work. Plus, your parents will love having you back in Riverside regularly. I accepted the position and began my first site visit the following month. Walking into Station 19, where I had worked as a paramedic 7 years earlier, felt like traveling through time. Many of the paramedics I had worked with were still there, now in supervisory positions. Tony Ramirez had been promoted to captain, and Maria Santos was the new training coordinator. "Dr. Martinez," Tony said with a huge grin, "this is incredible. From paramedic to medical director, you've come full circle." "It does feel that way," I agreed, "but in the best possible sense. The training program we developed incorporated many of the educational principles I had learned during my university work. Instead of focusing solely on technical skills, we emphasized critical thinking, communication, and system-wide understanding of emergency care. Paramedics need to understand how their decisions affect patient outcomes throughout the entire care continuum," I explained to the training staff during our first planning meeting. "It's not enough to stabilize someone in the field. You need to consider how your interventions will influence emergency department care and ultimately affect patient recovery." The approach was well received by both experienced paramedics and new trainees. Veterans appreciated the emphasis on professional development and critical thinking, while new paramedics benefited from understanding their role within the larger healthcare system. 6 months into my role as medical director, we received a call that would test everything we had implemented in our training program. I was in Riverside for my monthly site visit when the alert came in. Multi-vehicle accident on Interstate 215 with multiple casualties and entrapment. All available units were being dispatched, and the incident commander requested medical direction from the scene. "Dr. Martinez," Captain Ramirez said, "would you like to respond with us? Your input could be valuable for triage and treatment decisions." I hadn't responded to an emergency call in over 4 years, but the prospect of working in the field again was irresistible. "Absolutely. Let's go." The accident scene was controlled chaos. 5 vehicles involved, 2 with significant damage, and at least 8 patients with varying degrees of injury. Fire department personnel were working to extricate trapped victims, while paramedics assessed injuries and established treatment priorities. Working as medical director, rather than a hands-on paramedic, gave me a different perspective on scene operations. Instead of focusing on individual patients, I was responsible for overall medical management and resource allocation. "Unit 19, what's your assessment of the red tag patient in Vehicle 2? I radioed. "Possible internal injuries, blood pressure dropping, compromised airway," came the response. "We need immediate transport." "Copy, Unit 23. Can you take the yellow tag patients from Vehicle 4? Unit 19 needs to transport red tag immediately." The coordination role felt natural, drawing on my understanding of both individual patient care and system-wide resource management. By the time the last patient was transported to the hospital, we had managed 8 casualties without any preventable complications. "That was textbook incident management," Chief Rodriguez told me afterward. "Your ability to see the big picture while understanding the clinical details made all the difference." The experience reinforced my conviction that my unconventional career path had prepared me for leadership roles that required both clinical expertise and operational understanding. My work in Riverside also created opportunities to give back to the community where my journey had begun. I started volunteering at the local high school, speaking to students about careers in emergency medicine and encouraging them to pursue their dreams regardless of other people's expectations. How many of you have been told you're not smart enough for something you really wanted to do? I asked during one presentation to a group of seniors. Almost every hand in the room went up. "Here's what I want you to understand," I continued. "Intelligence isn't fixed. Capability isn't predetermined. The most important factor in achieving your goals is your willingness to persist when things get difficult." I shared my story with these students, emphasizing the years of struggle and doubt, the family members who questioned my judgment, and the moments when giving up would have been easier than continuing. The difference between people who achieve their dreams and people who don't isn't intelligence or talent, I told them. It's the ability to keep moving forward when everyone else thinks you should quit. Several students approached me after the presentation with questions about healthcare careers, and I made sure to give them my contact information for future guidance. One student, Maria Gonzalez, reminded me strongly of myself at her age. She was interested in becoming a doctor, but worried that her family's financial situation made medical school impossible. "My parents think I should be practical and become a medical assistant," she said. "They're afraid that trying for medical school will just lead to disappointment and debt." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think I want to try anyway," she said quietly. "But it's hard when the people who love you don't believe in your dreams." I gave her my card and told her to call me if she needed advice or encouragement. Over the following months, I mentored her through the college application process, helped her find scholarship opportunities, and provided the support that I had lacked during my own journey. "Dr. Martinez," she called me 6 months later, "I got accepted to UC Riverside with a pre-med scholarship. I'm going to do it." "I never doubted you would," I replied, and I meant it. 5 years after starting my faculty position, David and I were settled into a rhythm that balanced our professional demands with our personal life. We had married in a ceremony attended by colleagues from both emergency medicine and fire service, and we had recently bought a house with views of Mount Rainier. Our careers complemented each other perfectly. David had been promoted to battalion chief and was responsible for EMS operations across several fire stations. I continued my university work while expanding my involvement in EMS system development throughout the Pacific Northwest. "You know what I realized?" David said one evening as we sat on our deck watching the sunset. "We both ended up exactly where we were supposed to be, but we took completely different paths to get here." "How so?" I asked. "I knew I wanted to work in emergency services from the time I was 12 years old. I took the most direct path possible: EMT training, paramedic school, fire academy, promotions through the ranks. Very traditional. And me? You took the long way around. College, struggling with your family's doubts, working as a paramedic, medical school, residency, faculty position. But that journey gave you perspectives I'll never have. You understand emergency medicine from angles I can't even see." He was right. My circuitous path had created opportunities that a more traditional route would never have provided. If I had gone directly to medical school after college, I would have missed the clinical experience that made me a better physician. If my family had supported my dreams from the beginning, I might have lacked the determination that helped me overcome later challenges. The struggles that had seemed like obstacles at the time had actually been essential preparation for the leadership roles I now held. My parents, now in their 70s, had become my most enthusiastic supporters. They attended every conference where I presented research, read every article I published, and proudly told anyone who would listen about their daughter, the emergency medicine professor. "You know what I regret most?" my mother said during a recent visit to Seattle. "All those years we spent trying to convince you to lower your expectations. We were so afraid you would fail that we almost prevented you from succeeding. You were protecting me the only way you knew how," I replied. "And in the end, your doubts made me stronger. I had to learn to believe in myself completely because I couldn't rely on your belief." "Still," my father added, "we should have trusted you to know what you were capable of." Mike and Ashley had both thrived in their own careers, inspired partly by watching my journey. Mike had expanded the auto repair business and was considering opening a second location. Ashley had completed her nurse practitioner degree and was working in urgent care, applying many of the emergency medicine principles I had shared with her over the years. "You changed our whole family's idea of what was possible," Ashley told me during a recent visit to Riverside. "Watching you achieve something we all thought was impossible made us realize we were limiting ourselves too." On my 40th birthday, the University of Washington honored me with early promotion to associate professor, recognizing my contributions to emergency medicine education and EMS research. The ceremony was held in the same auditorium where I had received my residency, graduation certificate 7 years earlier. Dr. Jessica Martinez has revolutionized how we think about emergency medicine education. Dr. Harrison said during his introduction. Her work bridges gaps between pre-hospital and hospital care that most physicians never even recognize exist. She represents the future of emergency medicine, comprehensive, systems-based, and focused on collaboration across all levels of care. As I stood at the podium to deliver my acceptance remarks, I looked out at an audience that included medical students, residents, faculty members, paramedics, and fire department officials. The diversity of the group reflected everything I had tried to accomplish in my career. 10 years ago, I was a paramedic who dreamed of becoming a physician, I began. Today, I'm a physician who remembers what it means to work in the field. That perspective has shaped everything about how I approach emergency medicine. I talked about the importance of understanding healthcare as a system rather than a collection of individual specialists. I emphasized the value of diverse educational backgrounds and the need for physicians who could communicate effectively with all members of the emergency response team. But most importantly, I talked about the lesson that had defined my entire journey. The most dangerous limitation you can accept is the one that comes from other people's understanding of your potential, I said. Intelligence, capability, and determination are not fixed quantities. They grow with challenge, persistence, and the willingness to prove yourself wrong about your own limitations. After the ceremony, a young medical student approached me with a question that brought my journey full circle. Dr. Martinez, I'm considering emergency medicine, but my advisor says it's too competitive for someone with my background. I didn't go to an elite undergraduate school, and my MCAT scores were just average. Do you think I should consider something else? I looked at this student and saw myself 15 years earlier, talented, determined, but surrounded by people who couldn't see past surface credentials to recognize deeper potential. What do you think? I asked. I think I want to try anyway, she said. Emergency medicine feels like what I'm supposed to do. Then ignore your advisor, I said firmly. Apply to emergency medicine programs, work harder than everyone else, and prove that determination matters more than pedigree. The specialty needs physicians who understand that excellence comes from commitment, not credentials. 6 months later, she matched into emergency medicine residency at a competitive program. She sent me a thank you note that I keep on my office wall as a reminder of why my work matters. As I write this, I'm approaching my 10th year as a faculty member at the University of Washington. The EMS education programs we developed have been adopted by medical schools across the country. Our research on pre-hospital communication has influenced protocol development in hundreds of EMS systems. The paramedic training program in Riverside has become a model for other departments throughout California. But the accomplishment I'm most proud of isn't professional. It's personal. Last month, I had dinner with my parents at the same kitchen table where they once told me I wasn't smart enough for medical school. This time, the conversation was about my latest research grant and an invitation to speak at an international emergency medicine conference. We were so wrong about you, my mother said again, shaking her head in amazement. No, I replied. You were wrong about what I could become, but you were right about who I was. I was a girl who dreamed bigger than seemed reasonable. The difference is that I never stopped dreaming. My father smiled. And you never stopped proving us wrong. I didn't prove you wrong to spite you, I said. I proved you wrong to show you what love looks like when it believes in someone's potential instead of their limitations. The girl they once called not smart enough became Dr. Jessica Martinez, emergency physician, professor, researcher, and medical director. But more importantly, she became a woman who learned that the most powerful voice in determining what you can achieve is your own. Today, when I walk into an emergency department wearing my white coat, when I teach medical students about the complexity of emergency care, when I work with paramedics to develop better treatment protocols, I carry with me the knowledge that every person has untapped potential waiting to be discovered. The key is never accepting other people's limitations as your own truth. and never giving up on yourself even when it seems like everyone else has. That's the real lesson of my story. Not that I became a doctor despite being told I wasn't smart enough, but that I learned to define my own capabilities and pursue my own dreams with unwavering determination. And that's a lesson that applies to anyone who has ever been told they're not smart enough, not talented enough, or not worthy enough to achieve what they truly want. The only person who gets to decide what you're capable of is you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.